Meet Sarah Mitchell, a 32-year-old graphic designer based in the heart of Chicago. On the surface, Sarah's life might seem like the picture of success. She has a stable job at a boutique agency, an Instagram-worthy apartment in Lincoln Park, and a portfolio of work that's received local accolades. But beneath this polished exterior lies a woman struggling to hold her life together. Sarah is no stranger to working late into the night, her apartment illuminated only by the glow of her laptop screen. Her desk is cluttered with half-empty coffee mugs and sketchbooks filled with designs she never quite feels are good enough to share. The silence of the late hours feels safe to her, a refuge from the chaos she associates with the world beyond her walls. Her social life has dwindled to casual text exchanges with a few friends who still reach out, though their patience is wearing thin. She often cancels plans at the last minute, claiming she's too busy, when in reality, the thought of social interaction makes her heart race and her palms sweat. Sarah's struggles are deeply rooted in a childhood she rarely talks about, even with herself. Growing up, she was the eldest daughter in a household where emotions were a sign of weakness. Her father, a perfectionist with a short temper, would criticize every misstep, whether it was a less-than-perfect report card or an off-key piano recital. Her mother, a people-pleaser, would silently endure, often telling Sarah to not upset your dad. These early experiences planted seeds of self-doubt and a relentless need for approval. Over the years, these seeds grew into a forest of anxiety, where Sarah constantly second-guessed her decisions and sought external validation for her worth. In her current life, these patterns play out in painfully familiar ways. At work, Sarah avoids taking risks with her designs, sticking to safe, predictable ideas even when she longs to experiment. In relationships, she avoids confrontation at all costs, often apologizing for things she didn't do just to keep the peace. Sarah doesn't fully understand why she's like this, but she knows it's holding her back. The nightmares of her childhood creep into her present, leaving her feeling trapped in a cycle she can't escape. If Sarah continues on this path, the future looks bleak. Her work performance is already slipping as she misses deadlines and avoids presenting her ideas in team meetings. Her boss, once supportive, has started to question her commitment. Meanwhile, her personal life remains a ghost town with no meaningful connections to anchor her. The worst-case scenario looms: burnout, loneliness, and a lingering sense that she's squandered her potential. Sarah imagines herself 5 years down the line, still stuck in the same patterns, her talent unrecognized, and her heart heavy with regret. But what if things could be different? Deep down, Sarah dreams of a life where she feels free to express her creativity, free to love without fear of rejection, and free to wake up in the morning without a pit of dread in her stomach. One night, after yet another failed attempt to sleep, Sarah finds herself scrolling through a mental health podcast. She stumbles upon an episode featuring Dr. Vincent Vale, a renowned therapist known for helping clients uncover the roots of their emotional struggles. His calm, reassuring voice feels like a lifeline. "You can heal," he says. "Your past doesn't have to define your future." For the first time in years, Sarah feels a flicker of hope. It's tentative and fragile, but it's enough to make her reach for her phone and book a consultation. This is where Sarah's journey begins. It's not an easy road, but it's one that holds the promise of transformation. Through her sessions with Dr. Vale, Sarah will confront the ghosts of her past, dismantle the barriers she's built around herself, and learn to embrace a life she once thought was out of reach. The stage is set for a powerful narrative of struggle and growth, one that will resonate with anyone who has ever felt trapped by their own history. This introduction sets the tone for Sarah's journey, highlighting her relatable struggles and creating a vivid picture of her inner and outer world. It positions her story as both unique and universally resonant, inviting viewers to see themselves in her challenges and root for her transformation. I'll proceed to write the next sections in the same detailed and emotionally engaging style. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments before continuing. Sarah's first meeting with Dr. Vincent Vale was a mix of nervous anticipation and skepticism. The office was inviting, with soft lighting, neutral tones, and the faint aroma of lavender in the air, a stark contrast to the clinical, sterile environments she had imagined. She clutched her coffee cup, her lifeline in situations where she felt out of place, and offered a faint smile as Dr. Vale greeted her warmly. Dr. Vale was a man in his mid-40s with kind eyes and a demeanor that instantly put Sarah at ease. His voice was calm yet confident, a steady anchor in the storm of her thoughts. As they sat across from each other, he leaned forward slightly, signaling his full attention. "Sarah," he began, "I want you to know this space is yours. There's no judgment here, only curiosity and understanding. You can share as much or as little as you're comfortable with." Sarah nodded but struggled to speak. She felt a lump in her throat, and her palms grew clammy. After a few moments of silence, she finally muttered, "I don't know where to start." "Start anywhere," Dr. Vale encouraged. "The beginning isn't as important as just starting." With that gentle nudge, Sarah began to talk, haltingly at first, but with growing confidence. She spoke of her anxiety, her inability to trust others, and the constant voice in her head that told her she wasn't good enough. In the following sessions, Dr. Vale guided Sarah through an exploration of her past. He didn't push, but rather asked questions that invited her to reflect. "Tell me about your childhood," he said one day. "What was it like growing up in your family?" Sarah hesitated, but eventually described a household dominated by her father's strict rules and her mother's quiet compliance. She spoke of how her achievements were rarely celebrated and how mistakes, no matter how small, were met with harsh criticism. "Do you remember how that made you feel?" Dr. Vale asked gently. "Small," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling. "Like nothing I did was ever good enough. I learned to keep my head down and avoid attention because it always seemed to bring trouble." Dr. Vale nodded, his expression compassionate. "It sounds like you were in survival mode, a natural response to a stressful environment. But sometimes the strategies we develop to survive as children don't serve us well as adults." This insight resonated deeply with Sarah. For the first time, she began to see her behaviors not as personal failings, but as adaptations to a difficult past. Acknowledging the roots of her struggles was one thing, changing her patterns was another. Sarah's journey was far from linear. In one session, Dr. Vale introduced the concept of cognitive distortions, ways of thinking that perpetuate anxiety and self-doubt. He asked Sarah to identify the thoughts that often ran through her mind when she faced a challenge. "I tell myself I'm going to fail," Sarah admitted, "that I'll embarrass myself, and everyone will see I'm not as good as they think." Together, they worked on challenging these thoughts. Dr. Vale taught Sarah how to reframe her internal dialogue, replacing self-criticism with self-compassion. It was a skill that felt foreign at first, but with practice, Sarah began to notice small shifts. There were setbacks too. Sarah missed a session after a particularly rough week at work, convinced that her struggles meant she wasn't making progress. When she returned, Dr. Vale reminded her that healing wasn't about perfection. "Progress isn't a straight line," he said. "Sometimes taking a step back is part of moving forward." In another breakthrough session, Dr. Vale guided Sarah through a role-playing exercise to confront her inner critic. Speaking to that voice directly was both cathartic and eye-opening. "You're not protecting me," Sarah found herself saying. "You're holding me back, and I deserve better." As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to notice changes in herself. She felt lighter, more hopeful. The moments of self-awareness she experienced in therapy started to spill over into her daily life. One day, she caught herself before apologizing unnecessarily to a coworker and instead expressed her opinion confidently. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. In her personal life, Sarah began reconnecting with an old friend, Emily, who had always been patient with her cancellations. Over coffee, Sarah shared a bit about her therapy journey. To her surprise, Emily responded with warmth and understanding, even opening up about her own struggles. This newfound openness marked a turning point for Sarah. She realized that vulnerability, which she had long feared, could be a bridge rather than a barrier. Sarah's journey of transformation was still unfolding, but the foundations were being laid. Each session with Dr. Vale brought her closer to understanding herself and building the skills she needed to thrive. The real test of her progress, however, was yet to come, a moment that would force her to confront her fears head-on and solidify the lessons she had learned. After months of therapy, Sarah began to feel like she was finally gaining control over her life. But progress was about to be put to the ultimate test. One Thursday afternoon, her manager, Lisa, stopped by her desk with an opportunity and a challenge. "Sarah," Lisa began, "you've been doing incredible work on the branding project for Haven Wellness. The client is thrilled with the direction, and they want you to present the final concept to their executive team next week." Sarah froze. Public speaking had always been her worst fear. The mere thought of standing in front of a room filled with sharp-eyed executives explaining her creative choices made her stomach churn. She wanted to say no. She wanted to push the task onto someone else, as she had done so many times before. But then she thought of Dr. Vale's words from their last session. "The walls we build to protect ourselves can also become our prisons. True growth often lies on the other side of discomfort." Taking a deep breath, Sarah gave Lisa a tentative smile. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll do it." In the days leading up to the presentation, Sarah's anxiety surged. Her inner critic returned with a vengeance, whispering familiar doubts. "You're going to mess this up. You're not good enough. They'll see right through you." But this time, Sarah was armed with tools she had learned in therapy. She scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Vale, where they worked through her fears. "What's the worst that could happen?" he asked, encouraging her to confront her catastrophic thinking. "I could stumble over my words," Sarah replied. "I could forget what I'm supposed to say. They might think I'm incompetent. And if that happens, will it erase the hard work you've done to get here?" Sarah hesitated before shaking her head. "No, it would just mean I had a bad day." "That's right," Dr. Vale said. "The story you tell yourself matters. Instead of focusing on what could go wrong, try telling yourself a different story. One where you prepare, do your best, and let the results take care of themselves." Over the weekend, Sarah practiced her presentation tirelessly. She used grounding techniques to calm her nerves and wrote affirmations on sticky notes, placing them around her apartment. One read, "I am capable. My voice matters." The day of the presentation arrived. Sarah stood outside the conference room, her heart pounding and her hands trembling slightly. The Haven Wellness executives had already arrived, and she could hear their voices through the door. She took a deep breath, placing her hand on her chest, a grounding technique Dr. Vale had taught her. "You've got this," she whispered to herself. Walking into the room, Sarah was greeted by a sea of faces. Some were smiling politely, others were unreadable. As she connected her laptop to the projector, she felt the familiar swell of panic. But then she remembered her preparation, the hours she had spent rehearsing, and the journey that had brought her to this moment. She began her presentation, her voice shaky at first, but growing steadier with each slide. When she reached the midpoint, she made a small joke about the creative process, eliciting a few laughs from the room. That moment of connection gave her confidence, and she finished strong. As she clicked to the final slide, the room erupted in applause. The lead executive leaned forward, a smile on his face. "This is outstanding work, Sarah. You've captured exactly what we were envisioning." Relief and pride washed over her as she realized she had done it. She had faced her fear, and she had succeeded. Later that evening, Sarah sat on her couch reflecting on the day. For the first time in years, she felt a genuine sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the presentation, it was about what it represented. By stepping out of her comfort zone, Sarah had proven to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. The voice of her inner critic was quieter now, replaced by a growing sense of self-trust. The next session with Dr. Vale felt like a celebration. "How does it feel to have faced your fear?" he asked. "Empowering," Sarah said, a smile spreading across her face. "It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. I realized I'm stronger than I thought." Dr. Vale nodded. "And that strength has always been there. You just needed to uncover it." This moment marked a turning point in Sarah's journey, a realization that growth is not about erasing fear, but about learning to move through it. She began to see herself not as a victim of her past, but as the author of her future. For viewers of her story, Sarah's transformation is a powerful reminder. The things we fear most are often the keys to our liberation. By facing them head-on, we unlock a strength we need. In the weeks following her presentation, Sarah began to notice profound changes in herself. It wasn't that her anxiety had completely disappeared. It still showed up from time to time. But now, instead of being paralyzed by it, Sarah saw it as a signal, a reminder to pause, reflect, and use the tools she had learned in therapy. At work, her confidence blossomed. Lisa, her manager, started giving her more creative freedom, and Sarah embraced the opportunity to take risks in her designs. She presented new ideas during team meetings, no longer hiding behind the safety of mediocrity. One of her concepts even led to the agency landing a major client, earning her recognition as a key contributor. In her personal life, Sarah began rebuilding relationships she had neglected. She reached out to her old friend Emily, apologizing for the many cancelled plans and explaining the struggles she had been working through. Emily welcomed her back with open arms, and they resumed their weekly coffee dates. Sarah also joined a local art therapy group, where she met others who shared their experiences with emotional healing. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in her struggles. She even found herself laughing, real, unguarded laughter, during one of their sessions, a moment that felt like a breakthrough in itself. Internally, Sarah experienced a newfound sense of peace. The harsh inner critic that had once ruled her thoughts now felt more like a faint whisper, one she could acknowledge without letting it control her. One evening, Sarah pulled out her sketchbook, something she hadn't done for pure enjoyment in years. As she drew, she realized she was no longer trying to create something perfect. Instead, she let her pencil flow freely, embracing the imperfections as part of the process. When she looked at the finished piece, a chaotic yet beautiful swirl of shapes and colors, Sarah felt an unexpected swell of pride. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a reflection of her journey, a testament to how far she had come. In his office, Dr. Vale often reflected on Sarah's story. For him, her transformation wasn't just about the milestones she had achieved. It was about the courage she had shown in facing her fears and rewriting her narrative. Sarah's journey reminds us of something fundamental, he said in a video blog for his practice. Trauma doesn't define us. It shapes us, yes, but it doesn't have to be the end of our story. Healing is about reclaiming agency, learning to see ourselves not through the lens of our past, but through the possibilities of our future. He shared a lesson from Sarah's experience, the importance of small, consistent steps. Too often, we think transformation requires grand gestures, but real change happens in the quiet moments, when we challenge a negative thought, take a risk despite our fear, or reach out to someone we trust. Those moments build resilience, one brick at a time. Dr. Vale's words resonated with many of his followers who saw themselves in Sarah's story. He reminded them that healing isn't a linear path, and setbacks don't erase progress. He also addressed a common fear, the belief that it's too late to change. No matter how long you've carried your pain, the opportunity for growth and healing is always there, he said. The first step might feel overwhelming, but it's also the most important one. To the viewers watching Sarah's story, Dr. Vale offered an invitation. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. What are the fears or patterns holding you back? What would your life look like if you decided to take the first step toward change? He encouraged them to start small, whether it was journaling, seeking out a therapist, or simply acknowledging their struggles. Transformation doesn't happen overnight, he said, but with each small step, you're moving closer to the life you deserve. In a rare moment of openness, Sarah shared a message with Dr. Vale's audience. If you had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here sharing my story, I wouldn't have believed you. I used to think my past defined me, that I'd always be stuck in the patterns I grew up with, but therapy taught me that I'm more than my pain. I've learned to give myself grace, to celebrate progress over perfection, and to believe that I'm worthy of a life that feels whole. Her words were met with an outpouring of support, as viewers left comments sharing their own struggles and expressing gratitude for her vulnerability. Sarah's story came full circle, illustrating the transformative power of self-awareness, courage, and persistence. For Dr. Vale and his audience, her journey served as both inspiration and a roadmap for those seeking to overcome their own challenges. Her final thought lingered. Healing is messy and imperfect, but it's also the most beautiful thing I've ever done for myself.